Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. We're just giving everybody a minute, and then we'll go as soon as we hit 6 o'clock.
So, Sarah, once you read that housekeeping remarks, we pause a little bit so Margarita can translate how, Margarita can explain how to join Spanish channel, like
Great.
clicking the interpretation globe button, etc.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sangmi.
Thank you. So, Margarita, it's clear to you, right? So after Sarah's housekeeping.
Yes, sounds good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Margarita.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're at 6 o'clock, so I'll start with the housekeeping remarks, and then we can get underway. Good evening, and thank you for participating in our remote meeting for the Regional AQMP workshop. This meeting is recorded and webcast. We have two formats for participation, the Zoom web application as well as teleconference. Please silence your other communication devices, such as your cell or desk phone, so that there aren't any disruptions during the meeting. During the meeting, all participants on Zoom, except for South Coast AQMD staff, will be placed on mute by the host. That means you will not be able to mute or unmute your lines manually. This meeting is being translated in Spanish. To ensure that you hear this meeting in the preferred language, everyone must go to the bottom of your screen and click on the globe icon labeled Interpretation. From there, you need to select either English or Spanish. After you select your language, if you hear both languages at the same time, please click Mute Original Audio. If you hear everything clearly, there is no need to click the Mute Original Audio button. Please note that there is also a separate Spanish phone line available for this meeting. It has the same call-in number as this meeting, but a different meeting ID number. The Spanish meeting ID number is 932-0955-9643. For those on Zoom, if you would like to make public comment on the Zoom screen, please click on the Raise Hand button. If you're using Zoom on your smartphone, please tap the Raise Hand button on the bottom of the screen. For those calling in using the phone line only, you can dial *9 on your keypad to signal that you would like to comment. Your name will be called when it is your turn to comment, and the host will unmute your line automatically. Please note you can hang up or leave the Zoom meeting at any time. Regarding decorum, please treat others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Failure to do so can result in your mic being muted or you being dropped from the meeting. And now I'll let Margarita give the instructions for translation services in Spanish.
Buenas tardes, soy una de las intérpretes hispanohablantes. Esta reunión se está interpretando al español. Para asegurar que usted pueda escuchar esta reunión en su idioma preferido, por favor vaya a la parte inferior de la pantalla y haga clic en el globo terráqueo que dice interpretación o interpretation. De ahí usted va a seleccionar su idioma de preferencia, sea el inglés o el español. Después de que escoja su idioma, si usted prefiere escuchar ambos o no prefiere escuchar ambos idiomas a la vez, por favor haga clic en Mute Original Audio o silenciar el audio original. Si usted escucha todo claramente, no hay necesidad de hacer clic en ese botón. Por favor, sepa que también hay una línea telefónica disponible en español para esta reunión. Tiene el mismo número de teléfono como esta reunión, pero tiene un número de identificación diferente. El número de identificación para la línea telefónica en español es el 932-0955-9643. De nuevo, el número de identificación en español es 932-0955-9643. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita. So as we start today, I'm just going to start with some introductions so you know who's speaking with you today. I'll start with myself. I'm Sarah Reese. I'm the Deputy Executive Officer for Planning at South Coast. I'm going to kick it over to different staff. I'll turn first to Mike Krause.
Great. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Sarah. My name is Mike Kraus. I work with Sarah. I'm her Assistant Deputy Executive Officer in Planning and Rules, and working on, of course, with everybody else on the AQMP, in particular, the control measures. And I will pass it on now to Dr. Sangmi Lee. Dr. Lee.
Thank you, Mike. Good evening, everybody. I'm Sangmi Lee. I'm Planning and Rules Manager overseeing AQMP modeling, inventory, and meteorology. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Okay, I'll kick it over to Barbara Baird.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Barbara Baird. I'm a Chief Deputy Counsel in the Legal Division at South Coast AQMD.
And Dr. Elaine Shen.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Elaine Shen. I'm Planning and Rules Manager and working on ISR rules and also our socioeconomic team.
And then last but certainly not least, Barbara Radlin.
Hello, my name is Barbara Radline. I am the Program Supervisor of the CEQA team, and I will be presenting the CEQA scoping portion of the presentation this evening.
So this evening, we're going to give you an overview of our draft 2022 Air Quality Management Plan. This is a really aggressive plan. It is a blueprint on how we're going to achieve and attain federal air quality standards. This one is specific to the 2015 8-hour ozone standard, which is the most recent standard from EPA on ozone. It's a very stringent standard, and so it requires that we make very significant emission reductions in our region. We project that we need to reduce emissions over 71% over what we would have from current regulations on the books by 2037. The good news is for this standard, 2037 is a deadline by which we need to attain. We'll talk a little bit about some nuances for the Coachella Valley and some differences that might affect this particular region. But given that we need such aggressive emission reductions, this is going to be a plan that really looks at a focus on zero emission technology wherever possible and a pivot to the transformation to those cleaner and advanced technologies. Another focus of this plan will be looking at sources of emissions that are regulated by the federal government. These would be our out-of-state trucks, these would be ships, these would be aircraft, locomotives, or construction equipment, things of that nature. A lot of the emissions that are causing our ozone problems are due to those sources, and those are sources that are beyond our direct regulatory authority. So a lot of challenges presented in going through this plan, but we think we have a pathway to be able to meet the standards by the required deadlines. So today, Dr. Sangmi Lee is going to walk you through an overview of the draft 2022 AQMP. Barbara Radlin is going to go through what we're doing to meet our requirements under the California Environmental Quality Act. And then finally, Elaine is going to give us an overview of our socioeconomic analysis associated with the AQMP. So with that, we'll have, in between presentations, I'll have some opportunities for folks to ask questions that are specific to those presentations. And at the end of all the presentations, we'll have some space for general public comments. With that, I'm going to kick it over for our first presenter, Dr. Sangmi Lee. Take it away, Sangmi.
Thank you very much, Sarah. But before going to presentation, do we notice the Spanish interpreter has a hands up? Is there something you'd like to make a comment on?
That means... Sorry, I just, this is Margarita, Spanish interpreter. I just need to be added as an interpreter, please.
Okay, then we can go back to the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So thanks again joining our regional public workshop for 2022 Draft Air Quality Management Plan. Next slide. So this we conducting series of workshops to accommodate to provide more opportunities for public to join. And this is the third one out of these 3 meetings. And this meeting information as shown in this slide. Next one. So we will start who we are. We are South Coast Air Quality Management District, and we are local air pollution control agency. We are the largest in the nation. We have 17 million residents in our jurisdiction. So primary responsibilities we have are regulating emissions from stationary sources. We develop and implement plans such as this AQMP to meet air quality standards. We issues permits and inspect the businesses, and then we also administer incentive projects. Next slide. So air quality definitely has also health impacts associated with it. One other, air pollution has health effects associated with it. And air pollution is contributing to the leading cause of death, as shown here, such as heart disease, lung disease, etc. So with this in mind, that is why we are working on the air pollution and improving them. Next slide. So the air pollutants in question here is ozone. Ozone is an air pollutant, especially when it is located near so-called human breathing level or close to the ground level, close to Earth's surface. So when there is emission of VOC and NOx, and then also in the presence of sunlight, this ozone forms through chemical reaction. Next slide. There are health impacts specifically associated with ozone. The previous slides were talking about general health effects of air pollutants, but ozone itself has health effects, and those are mostly associated with respiratory diseases such as sore throat, coughing, and asthma attack type of thing, or bronchitis. But also one important aspect of ozone's health impact is ozone, the pollutants that forms ozone, also makes PM 2.5 particle matters, and then PM can cause premature death in addition to other serious health effects. So it is presenting serious health effects associated with these air pollutants. Next slide. So once ozone is formed in the atmosphere, they can also travel. They transport from one area to another area. For example, as the South Coast Air Basin or Greater Los Angeles area, lots of emission sources. So ozone is formed through chemical reaction over the Greater Los Angeles area, and that can be transport to the Coachella Valley. Ozone can, or like any other pollutants, can travel vertically as well with height. So depending on how far air pollutant goes with the height, that also determines how clean or how bad air quality could be. Next slide. These photos in this slide pretty much present what our challenges are. The one on the right is the photo taken in 1950. The one in the left is taken in 2017. So 2050, needless to say, it was horrible air pollution. But 2017, it's a lot improved, significantly improved. But still, the problem is we have the worst ozone air quality in the nation, and then we are among the worst in the PM pollution in the nation. Next slide. So then what do we do with this air pollution? So starting from here, we kind of a little bit going into what's the step to improve air quality. The very first one is there is something called the National Ambient Air Quality Standard. So US EPA has the authority to establish these air quality standards. That the main purpose is to protect public health and welfare. And these standards periodically getting reviewed, mostly every 5 years. The latest standard was set in 2015, and it was 8-hour ozone standard. So once this air quality standard is set, then EPA also designate the area whether they meet the standard or not. Once the area is classified as not meeting the standard, then the area needs to develop a plan to meet the standard. And also, if you do not meet the standard by the specific due dates, then there will be consequences such as federal sanctions and the draconian federal regulations. Next slide. Here comes the air quality management plan. As Sarah gave in the introduction, AQMP is the blueprint for our agency to bring the entire region to meet the national ambient air quality standard. AQMP is also needed under California's Health and Safety Code. And we have this series of AQMPs developed over time, and then this little icons on the right shows the most recent ones, and then our major ones that developed in past 15 years. Currently, for this specific standard, which is 2015 8-hour ozone standard, South Coast Air Basin is classified as extreme non-attainment area, with the due date to meet the standard is 2037. Next slide. So this AQMP, developing AQMP requires quite complex process. This process includes the close collaboration and partnership with our sister agencies such as SCEQ, CARB, and EPA. But throughout this process, we seek for public input. We reaching out to general publics to get their feedback and then reflect those opinions in the AQMP. Next slide. So this graph depicts the changes in ozone levels in the past 3 decades. There are 2 lines here. Blue is the air quality in South Coast Air Basin, and red represent ozone levels in Coachella Valley. Evidently, there is a significant progress made in the past 3 decades or so. However, it is a significant progress has been made in both the South Coast Basin and Coachella Valley. In the South Coast Basin, the air ozone level is a little bit sensitive to the meteorological condition, and then poor meteorology kind of contributed to a little slight uptick in the recent years. But Coachella Valley, more or less, showing the continued progress in recent years. Next slide. Going a little bit more details in Coachella Valley's ozone levels. So now here, the Coachella Valley's ozone level that shows for 8-hour ozone and 1-hour ozone. And this, the broken lines, in horizontal broken lines indicate national air quality standard. So one thing we notice is this red line that representing 1-hour ozone levels are well below this, national 1-hour ozone standard. The second one, blue one, is 8-hour ozone. And then this, again, this horizontal broken lines indicating the EPA's air quality standard, but different one. That as you can see, this measurement data approaching the first broken line, that is 1997 8-hour ozone standard, indicating Coachella Valley is very close to meet this standard. Next slide. So as we looked at in the previous slides, there are multiple ozone standards, and here listing the 4 of them. And there is 1-hour ozone, and then for 8-hour ozone standard, there are 3 different ones. And this specific plan in reference tonight is regarding this 2015 8-hour ozone standard. Currently, it is attainment due is 2033, but later on we will further discuss with the attainment due dates. Next slide. So then, what are the key air pollutants to improve ozone air quality? So with this AQMP and many of in-house studies and also external experts showing that the NOx is the key pollutants to improve ozone air quality. And then it also showing that there is no viable pathway to meet ozone standard without significant NOx reductions. VOC reductions certainly help. So we have a little bit of a strategic VOC strategy that will be discussed later in the slide. So NOx is the key pollutants to attain the ozone air quality standard. Next slide. Then the question is, where does NOx emissions coming from? So this pie chart is showing the sources of NOx emissions. One in the left is more or less the current day situation, 2018 NOx emission. And then one in the right is the emissions for 2037. So the pie on the right side is smaller than the one in the left, indicating future emissions as smaller than nowadays emission. That is due to already adopted the regulations and programs. And then one more thing to notice is the distribution of these emissions. So the pie chart in the left is showing that this yellow portion and then also this large gray block, those representing mobile sources, and specifically this yellow block is off-road mobile sources. But when you go to this right one, this yellow block that representing off-road mobile source is growing. It has much larger presence in the future years. So this indicates that regulations, in other words, emission reductions are necessary to focus on this off-road category. Next slide. So this slide is showing that how much NOx reductions are needed to meet the ozone air quality. In the previous slide, we've seen that in the future years, the NOx emission will be smaller than current days. However, it's shown that this so-called business as usual condition is not sufficient to meet the ozone standard. So what this graph is showing is this yellow arrow is indicating how much reductions are necessary to meet the standard. So here this white text box indicating so-called something carrying capacity. What that means is that is the maximum amount of NOx emissions that can exist while still meeting the ozone air quality. So that carrying capacity is 63 tons as shown in this slide. But that means if we're starting from nowadays condition, meaning the 2018 condition, that is almost 82% reduction from current day condition, but also that is almost over 70% reduction from future business as usual condition, indicating we need much more reductions in addition to the reduction expected from already adopted regulations. Next slide. Then where we are at in regard to our emission reduction goals. As we've seen in one of the previous slides, there are multiple ozone standards, and then each of them has this milestone years, 2023, 2031, and 2037 is the new one we are working on. The previous AQMP has set the goal, so this thick white arrow indicating the emission reduction goals that needs to be achieved at this specific years. Evidently, the emission reduction goals or the amount of reductions needed to meet the ozone standard is the greatest for 2037, indicating that is the most stringent air quality standard we are working on. Next slide. So knowing that this is aggressive emission reduction goal, and then we have approximately 15 years to go, then the question is this possible? So the answer is yes, there is a pathway to do it. So as we've seen in the previous slide, we have made incredible amount of progress already. So we can continue this progress to meet this ozone standard. It won't be easy, so it will be challenging. And then we cannot do it alone. We need a partnership with all our sister agencies and the stakeholders. And it will be expensive. And then it will be also requiring emerging advanced technology. Next slide. So then how do we to get there? This traditional approach may not be the only approach. So innovative approach are necessary to do it. So this traditional approach has been applied to many sources located within South Coast Air Basin. This traditional approach made incredible progress we have seen in past couple of decades. But still, this traditional approach won't be enough to go to where we need to go to. Therefore, wherever feasible, we need to bypass and then employ innovative approaches. Next slide. So how do we go there? So apparently a zero emission approach is necessary to go down to such a cleaner condition. And then we have to consider what pathway we will be needed to get there, and then what type of fuels we will be using. We will be planning, because a traditional fuel type may not get us to get there. As shown in the previous slides, innovation is needed in every sector, and while doing so, the consideration needs to be given for cost effectiveness and affordability. So these are the topics we need to work on, not only to develop this plan, but also after plan is adopted, and then implementing these measures in the future years. Next slide. So now we know where our goal is, and then need to discuss how to get there. So next couple of slides, we'll talk about the strategies, how to reach the carrying capacity, how to reach to the stage to meet the air quality standard. So starting from this stationary area source categories that we have primary jurisdiction over, we have 4 different groups of control measures that targets NOx control, and then seeking for co-benefits, greenhouse gas reduction policies, and then some limited VOC measures and other measures. Next slide. This further classifies the NOx control strategies into 3 groups. The NOx control strategy has residential combustion group, commercial combustion group, and large combustion groups. Each box lists all the measures that included in each group, but the more details are also available in draft AQMP, which is currently on our internet, on our website, so available for public review. Out of these 3, the first 2 are considered residential and commercial building measures, and we will see a little bit more detail how to pursue these measures. Next slide. So this residential and commercial building measures, when it comes to these measures, we are not the only one who are looking for opportunities to reduce emissions from. There are other agencies, there are other state and local agencies looking for same opportunities to reduce the emissions of criteria pollutants as well as greenhouse gases. For example, California Energy Commission has Title 24 that regulates the emissions from Title 24 codes that requires looking for the emission reductions in these building categories. California Air Resources Board also has specific measures targeting these same sectors. Bay Area AQMD is pursuing rulemaking for this same sector. And that there are over 50 cities in the entire states looking for same opportunity. Therefore, we are looking for building up from these existing efforts. Next slide. So these are the 4-step approaches we are laying out for these specific measures. First, as explained in this previous slides, we are going to figure out what existing control or policies are and then try to build on top of it. And second, whenever it is needed, we're looking for the options to bring zero emission for this residential and building categories. And then step 3, when it is not feasible to do zero emission, we look for options to go low NOx technology. And the last step, we're looking for the incentive options to consider this equity, to consider this transition specifically in the low-income communities, environmental justice communities. Next slide. So this summarizes our approach to seek for NOx reductions in the stationary sources. One, of course, a regulatory approach that will be using the requiring zero emissions and allows lower NOx technology when zero emission is not feasible. And then incentive approaches, of course, will focus on disadvantaged communities, and also incentive can accelerate the transition to zero emission technology. Next slide. Next. So here, then, as we mentioned, we also, going to previous. So as we mentioned, we are looking for limited VOC strategy as well. That is because VOC is also considered as a toxic. It has some of them even considered as carcinogenic. So reducing VOC helps to lower ozone concentration, especially current days, and also reducing VOC improves PM levels as well. So we have included limited VOC control measures as well. Next slide. Moving on, so South Coast mobile source control measures, as shown in this diagram, we grouped them into 4. They are facility-based measures and emission growth management, incentive programs, and other measures. Next slide. So first, starting with the facility-based mobile source measures. So primary approach for these measures are indirect source rules, and where it is available and feasible, it's voluntary agreement. So first group, in terms of indirect source rules, we have ISR ongoing. Previous slides, please. So for ISR is ongoing for ports, seaports, and rail yards. And then we also have already adopted warehouse ISR. From that, we will be continuing enforcing the rules and also try to quantify emission reductions from existing rules. And where feasible, we'll reevaluate and determine if amendment is needed. Voluntary approach-wise, South Coast AQMD signed MOUs with 5 commercial airports. We are continue implementing this MOU-based approach and then seeking for emission reductions from the implementation. Next slide. These are our approach for emission growth management. They are new and redeveloped projects. And then we also have general conformity related control measures. And then we also have clean construction policy that encourages the cleanest equipment to be employed in construction. Next slide. We have a variety of incentive programs as shown here in this slide, such as Replace Your Rise or small off-road equipment exchange programs, such as lawnmowers, leaf blowers, and then incentives to switch out the cleaner engines for passenger locomotives. And then there is a car mower program. There is a primer, so-called the Pacific Rim Initiative for Marine Emission Reductions Program, and also REC 16. So the strategy is we continue implementing these incentive programs and then continue taking credits from this implementation of the funding. And then where it's feasible, we expand the current program. Next slide. This depicts the CARB's measures for the South Coast Air Basin. CARB released a draft 2022 state SIP strategy. It includes many different types of the measures that targeting area sources, on-road vehicles, off-road vehicles, and the sources of which regulation belongs to federal governments. And then this pie chart here shows where the emission reductions coming from, which sector those emission reductions coming from, and apparently big chunk of emission reductions coming from the sources belongs to federal authority. Next slide. This bar chart is emission reductions estimated by CARB in their SIP strategy, and indicating NOx emission reductions in blue and then VOC reductions in red for different sectors. Apparently, again, this is confirming the previous pie chart, so there are lots of emission reductions needed in federal and international sources. Next slide. These are the bar graph that summarizes our strategy and categorized in these 5 categories. As shown here, the first one is point and area source, the second on-road mobile, third one off-road, ongoing ocean-going vessels and aircraft. So yellow block is to the future baseline emission, meaning that how the future emissions would be if no new strategies included, just everything goes as business as usual. And then this orange block is the target stage. That is where we need to go. And this white arrow indicating the amount of emission reduction needed to get where we needed to go. These white arrows, emission reductions, reflect both the South Coast AQMD's measure and then CARB's measure. It also includes regulatory measure and incentive measure. So obviously all the sectors require to go down quite a bit. But then this last one, this aircraft, so far there is no specific measures identified to reduce emissions from aircraft operation. However, emission reductions are needed. We cannot leave any source category without control to meet this 70 ppb standard. This leads to the next slide, that is the discussion about federal and international sources. So as you shown in the previous couple of slides, approximately 1/3 of the entire emissions coming from South Coast Basin belongs to federal and international jurisdiction. Those include ships, aircrafts, locomotives, and selected other mobile sources. As we mentioned and as demonstrated in the previous slides, we cannot leave any sources untouched or unregulated to meet this ozone standard. Next slide. So this bar chart illustrates how much of emissions emission reductions need to come from federal government. And this total length of this emission indicating business as usual total emissions expected in 2037. And orange block is the maximum amount of emissions that we can accommodate. So this yellow part is the measures that the authority belong to. That yellow part is the reductions. That regulatory authority belongs to South Coast AQMD and CARB. And this black box is the portion that federal authority needs to kick in to assist our attainment, to assist us to meet the ozone standard. Next slide. So then how this strategy is going to be interpreted for the attainment of Coachella Valley. So at the very beginning, we mentioned the Coachella Valley was classified as so-called severe 15 non-attainment category. That means attainment due date for Coachella Valley is 2032. However, this analysis included in the AQMP indicate that it is not possible to meet the 70 ppb standard by 2032. So that is because Coachella Valley's ozone is tied with the South Coast Air Basin's ozone issues. It's a so-called transport issues. Next slide. This indicates this explains the Coachella Valley's ozone issues. So it is the first one. So I need to explain this a little bit in detail, but the first bar chart showing Coachella Valley current day's ozone level. The second one, the orange one, if you remove all the major facilities, actually all the facilities, all industry and commercial facilities located within the Coachella Valley, and then that impact is just tiny little bit. It's 0.1 ppb. The third one, gray bar, that represent all the sources located within Coachella Valley, meaning that even the entire population, we pretend that there is nobody in Coachella Valley and no emission sources in Coachella Valley, including cars and lawnmowers and any shops and nothing. But still, it is not enough to meet the standard. The last bar is the South Coast Air Basin. What if we remove everybody in South Coast but leave everybody in Coachella Valley? What happened? Yeah, then it improves Coachella Valley's air quality. So this indicate Coachella Valley cannot attain ozone standard by itself without emission reductions placed in South Coast Air Basin. Next slide. So this is why South Coast AQMD is proposing to reclassify Coachella Valley as extreme. The extreme classification is the same as the South Coast Air Basin, and the due date is 2037. but in this bump up or reclassification, we do not expect any net impact to Coachella Valley. The reason is Coachella Valley is already extreme non-attainment category for one of all year ozone standard. So therefore, there is no net impact associated with this so-called bump up. Next slide. This draft. So this AQMP is a public process, as we described at the beginning of the slides, and then we have different venues to reach out to general public and stakeholders and get the stakeholders' feedback. This illustrate different venues we have hosted, and then this public workshop is definitely one of them. Next slide. Currently, 2022 AQMP or draft 2022 AQMP is available for public to comment. And then this shows the website where the document is located at. Next slide. There are multiple ways to submit your comments. One, you can use internet submission form, of which address is shown here. Second, you can email to us using this email address, or you can use the voice call. And we encourage the public to provide the comments by June 21st, so we can reflect your opinion in the revised version of AQMP. Next slide. The next step for us is we are going to revise and then release the revised draft somewhere during summer. Then we will host another set of public meetings. This time it's called regional public hearings during summer. And then this AQMP will be considered by South Coast Governing Board in October. Next slide. We encourage you to stay informed by signing up to our newsletter as shown here. Next slide. Smart App is a great way to stay connected with us to receive all the updates happening in South Coast AQMD. Next slide. And also, if you have other concerns about air quality, this is the way you can reach to us. This concludes the first presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Great. Thank you very much, Sang-Mi, for that informative presentation. At this point, if folks have any questions on the substance of what Sang-Mi discussed, we're happy to take them. Please raise your hand if you want to speak. I see that we have one hand raised so far. The phone number ending in 373. If you can. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Am I being heard?
Yes.
That's Harvey.
Okay. All right. Good evening. My name's Harvey Eder, and I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition. There are a few things. Apparently, Coachella is dependent on reductions from South Coast through Chetton standards. And the issue of federal sources being about a third of the sources. I want to know if this has happened and this issue has been brought up in other areas, and what kind of approaches have been made to it if that's happened, including the federal government saying that these sources are just to be controlled locally, legally, etc. One issue is trucks, and Dr. Reese, and we were told in the past that over 15 truck fleets, about 15 and more, are controlled by the federal government. And within the last year, I heard her say that that's not true. It's state government. So I'd like an explanation of that and how that, what the legal, was that case law, etc. What's changed, or anyway. So that's important. And there are a couple other things that are kind of slipping me now, but I'm real concerned about this and basically dumping it all on the feds. Okay, now the conditions are not improving; they're getting worse, and we've got to admit that they're getting worse. We had 121 degrees 2 years ago in the valley, and it was the same in Portland, Oregon, and up in Canada and in Siberia. It's not going away. And we had Krakoff, who's on both boards, and Mr. Environmental Attorney, head of the Bar Association's Committee on Environment.
Harvey, if I could maybe answer some of the first questions you raised. And
okay, because we've got to deal with the real situation. And if we don't do anything drastically, like a 5-year conversion, like we've been proposing the last 30 years, and get serious, we're not going to make it, period. And we're hitting a time politically and economically now, going into recession and all this.
Let me see if I can start to answer the beginning part of your questions. I want to be able to get to that.
Excuse me.
So first, you asked about kind of federal sources and whether this has been a problem in other areas of the country. There are other areas of the country that are starting to see increasing ozone as a result of mobile source emissions, most of which are subject to federal authority, not state or local authority. Particularly in other states besides California. California special because under the Clean Air Act, California is allowed to establish separate motor vehicle emission standards, but other states don't have that ability. So we are starting to see that in other parts of the country. We see it more notably in the Southern California area, just because our ozone levels are so high, and over 80% of the emissions that are responsible for ozone are coming from those mobile sources. Talking about trucks, trucks are subject to rules that CARB develops, California Air Resources Board. But then there's also these trucks that come from out of state, and those out of state trucks are subject to federal emission standards. And so there is some control.
What percentage are out of state versus in state?
What was that?
What percentage are out of state versus in state?
We actually think the majority of the trucks in our region are registered out of state.
50, 60%.
We think it's about 60% actually. So that's pretty, significant. So, even though California is able to develop its own emission standards for trucks, if we have all those out of state trucks coming in, it still makes it very difficult for us.
We still got, 40, 45%, whatever, that's significant.
So, and then, in terms of concern about, putting this burden on the federal government, really the bulk of the emissions that are contributing to ozone are subject to federal regulation. And if we could shut down all the stationary sources in our region and still not meet ozone standards. And so we really need the federal government to step up and take action.
Okay, we're ahead of other districts. We're the first ones to raise these arguments and stuff, right?
I think other areas are starting to see this as well, Harvey.
What other areas, and who's brought up this argument?
Well, again, there are other parts of the country where areas are slipping into higher levels of ozone non-attainment, and they're starting to. They know that that's due to the influence of mobile sources.
Where are they?
So New York, New Jersey is one example. The greater Chicago area is another example. Denver. So it's happening, in various major metropolitan areas.
Yeah. Okay. Just one thing that I heard was about ozone has translates to PM. I want to know what percentage of all PM comes from ozone, and what those numbers are. It's supposed to be 90 parts per billion per cubic meter versus 30 or something like this, and
yeah, Harvey, it's really
the body count. What are the numbers? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the NOx emissions. So ozone's formed in the atmosphere, but from the reaction of NOx and VOCs, PM, fine particulate matter, can also be formed in the atmosphere. And in fact, in our region, most of the fine particulate matter is formed in the atmosphere, and NOx also plays a key role in doing that. So NOx is really
the presentation just said specifically ozone goes to PM. What's the numbers on that were referred to in the talk?
Ozone doesn't
Or
go
did
to
I miss
PM.
it?
It's the NOx that's sort of the building block of both ozone and
I
PM.
understand that, but I thought I heard it stated that whether it came from VOC or NOx, ozone goes to PM at what, 30%? I heard carb. I don't know. What's the number? It was stated. Let's put a number on it.
I will defer to Dr. Sangmeili, who is far more qualified to discuss atmospheric chemistry than I am.
Okay, what's the number?
Sammy?
Yeah, so it's ozone precursors becomes PM, not ozone itself. It is a completely different pathway.
Okay, so I misheard then.
Yes, it's ozone precursors. Yes.
Okay, well, I'd like to understand that better, and if you can, direct towards literature or something.
Sure, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. We'd be happy to follow up with you, Harvey. At this point,
okay.
I do want to be conscious of time, and I don't see any other.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think these are important issues that were brought up. Anyway,
thank you, Harvey. So I don't know if I don't see any other hands raised. So I think at this point we'll turn to our next presentation, and Barbara Radline is going to run us through our CEQA issues. So
Great.
with that, Barbara, take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Barbara Radline. I'm the program supervisor of the CEQA team. And these next few slides will be discussing the CEQA process and why we're having a CEQA scoping meeting today. Next slide, please. So for those unfamiliar, CEQA is an acronym for the California Environmental Quality Act. It's a state law which requires the evaluation of 18 environmental topic areas for projects. And the 2022 AQMP is considered a project under CEQA. Now, the AQMP contains a series of actions that can be characterized as one large project. And then it will have a series of actions that follow, such as the issuance of rules and regulations and plans, or amendments to those rules and regulations. And so as part of that structure, the decision under CEQA was to prepare a program environmental impact report, or program EIR for short. Next slide, please. So we're having a CEQA scoping meeting today, and it's a combined public workshop serving as a CEQA scoping meeting. And we're combining these two meetings during the notice of preparation initial study period that for this first phase of the CEQA process. Now, so a CEQA scoping meeting is required for projects with potentially significant environmental impacts. And the CEQA scoping meeting is a perfect opportunity for the public, other agencies, and interested parties to find out more about the project and to provide suggestions on the CEQA analysis and scope, additional topics to be evaluated in the program EIR, to provide ideas about mitigation measures, as well as ideas about project alternatives. Any comments that you make this evening will be incorporated into the draft program EIR, as well as any written comments that you provide later on the notice of preparation initial study will also be incorporated in the draft program EIR. Next slide, please. So this slide is a handy dandy slide because it has a nice image and it takes you through the CEQA process. It's a good overview. So the far left arrow, highlighted in yellow for the NOPIS, is the stage that we're in right now. We're in the very first step of the overall CEQA process. And the notice of preparation that we released back on May 13th is to notify the public that we're preparing a document, that we've evaluated these 18 environmental topic areas, and that a portion of those topic areas are significant, potentially significant, and will be evaluated further in the draft program EIR. This is the first opportunity to provide comments. The second step is to the arrow to the right of the NOPIS for the draft program EIR. And this will include the comments from today's CEQA scoping meetings, as well as from the CEQA scoping meetings held yesterday, as well as comments that we received on the notice of preparation initial study. Now, the draft program EIR will focus on analyzing the potentially significant environmental impacts that we identified in the NOPIS. It will recap a conclusion of the environmental topic areas that were either identified as no impact or having less than significant environmental impacts. And the draft program EIR will analyze project alternatives, and it will provide a second opportunity for a 45-day comment period. As we progress through developing the 2022 AQMP, there may be some changes to the project overall. And so for CEQA, we will also update the CEQA document in the final program EIR to reflect those changes. And then the final program EIR will include the responses to comments from the draft program EIR, plus the comments and responses from the NOPIS, plus the CEQA scoping comments and responses. And as we progress even further to bring the project to our governing board for consideration, they will consider the final program EIR for certification. And for any mitigation measures and a mitigation monitoring and reporting plan, they will consider that for adoption, as well as considering adoption of findings and a statement of overriding considerations for any remaining significant impacts. Next slide, please. So the analysis in the Notice of Preparation Initial Study is comprised of 2 chapters. The first chapter provides background information and the project description, and the second chapter goes through the environmental checklist for each of those 18 environmental topic areas. Now, Appendix A of the NOPIS contains a handy spreadsheet or matrix that goes through each proposed control measure and identifies the environmental topic areas that were identified as potentially significant. So if you have a particular concern about a control measure and we're wondering what impact areas might be affected by that control measure, I refer you to Appendix A for more information. So the environmental topic areas overall, when we look at the collective group of control measures that are proposed, there are 6 environmental topic areas that were identified as potentially significant: air quality and greenhouse gases, energy, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, noise, and solid and hazardous waste. Next slide, please. The Notice of Preparation was released on May 13th, and it's available on our website. The comment period will close on June 14th at 5 p.m. We also have hard copies available if you need them. We originally prepared this slide with the intention of having an in-person meeting, but with COVID, we needed to go virtual, but we still have hard copies. So feel free to reach out if you'd like to get a hard copy of the document. Next slide, please. If you'd like to submit comments on the analysis in the NOPIS, we welcome you to do so. Please send them to the attention of Kevin Nee of my staff. He is on vacation right now, so he was unable to join us for today's presentation, but he will be monitoring his inbox. And so any comments that come in by email or fax or through USPS, we will compile those and we'll prepare responses to be included in the draft program EIR. Next slide, please. So the next step of the process will be the draft program EIR, and we're in the midst of preparing it right now. We anticipate releasing it for a 45-day comment period sometime beginning in July. And again, it will include any comments and responses that we've received. Once again, the document will be made available on our website. And if you require a hard copy, you can also reach out to us again for a hard copy of that. Next slide, please. So here's a general slide for our CEQA team contact information. As you met Mike Krause earlier, and then myself is on the lower left, and Kevin Nee, he's not with us this evening, but he will also be available to answer any questions that you may have. Next slide, please. Okay, so that concludes my presentation. I can open it up for any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Barbara. So if anybody's got any questions on the substance of what Barbara just presented, please raise your hand and let us know. I see that Harvey, you have your hand raised. See if we can unmute Harvey. Go ahead, Harvey.
Hello, I'm being heard?
Yes.
How do you spell Kevin's last name?
N-I, Kevin Nee, N-I.
And I.
And I. Okay. All right, thank you. And also, I want to make sure there's a 2012 Supreme Court case in California. That was the district's case against the coating manufacturers. It went on for a couple decades. Okay, it was a unanimous decision in 12 about BARC's best available retrofit control technology, and there's the whole state to retrofit. Okay, it said if it's cost effective now, you have to use it now. If it will be in 1, 3, 5 years, you have to use it then. And in discussions with Dr. Burke, February 8 administrative committee
Harvey,
meeting,
I'm not
putting
sure
in
if
the
this has anything to do with Barbara's presentation.
well, it has to do with the plan and the technologies that are going to be used, and that it applies to solar. It applied to catalytic conversion as technology forcing. And Dr. Burke agreed in an administrative meeting, and this is the law, and it was part of the 16 Solar New Deal, and it's not been dealt with. It's got to be made priority in this plan, along with the 16 Solar New Deal, which was never evaluated by the district CARB or EPA, which is totally illegal, and we got run out of federal court trying to have a freedom of speech, all right, and present and petition the government, and then we've got no backing from y'all on trying to get the tapes from
Harvey,
there and the records that we put in.
Towards general public comment versus specific.
Okay. Also, the Bay Area is going hot water by 27. Okay, this has been brought up time and time again for solar. We do the same thing here? Anyway, enough for now.
All right. Thank you, Harvey.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna add, we will be looking at all sorts of technology during the role development, and as you say, Harvey, a BART analysis and all that's at play. So,
okay. Any other questions regarding Barbara's presentation? All right, I'm seeing none, so we're going to queue up our discussion on a socioecon analysis. Dr. Elaine Shen is going to give that presentation. Elaine, take it away.
Right. Again, good evening, everybody. My name is Elaine Shan, Planning and Rules Manager with our Planning Division. Next slide, please. And so the purposes of us having this meeting here is really, it serves two purposes. So one is to increase the transparency of our socioeconomic report analysis, and also for us to continue our stakeholder engagement via different public processes. And in terms of transparency, so when we analyze our control measure, the associated costs and benefits and job impacts, and we would like to be able to analyze these different components in terms or in the context of the key socioeconomic issues that are present today and also in the future. And in this meeting, we will also discuss about a draft outline of our socioeconomic report and each component of that. And so in addition to the two scoping sessions yesterday and also the current scoping session, we have conducted or participated in two of the scientific, technical, and modeling peer review advisory group. So basically it serves as technical advisory purposes. And so we did that late last year and also earlier this year. And next Tuesday on May 31st, we will have another meeting where we will be discussing about preliminary costs and also the health benefits associated with the implementation of the 2022 AQMP. And so surely we're going to have more engagement ongoing in the future, and we will be announcing and scheduling those meetings, and we will make sure that everybody is informed. Next slide, please. So what is in the socioeconomic report, or how did we do the socioeconomic report? So we started to do this since year 1991, more than 30 years ago. And even though this socioeconomic impact assessment for AQMP is not legally required, we are still doing that in order to better inform the public and of course also our policymakers and decision makers. And we wanted to make them know that back in 2016, for the 2016 AQMP, our socioeconomic report incorporated more than a dozen different key recommendations from an independent review that was done in 2014 by the App Associates. And so they came up with a lot of really good recommendations for us to improve our processes and also our analysis. And so we have implemented pretty much all of them. And for the 2022 report, we continue to be committed to continue to incorporate the app recommendations that I just referred to. And we're also committed to providing draft reports, and so the public can comment on it and also provide inputs to us. Next slide, please. And so for the draft outline of the AQMP socioeconomic report, we're going to provide a non-technical executive summary. So where we're going to summarize our key findings. And so then we'll provide the easy digest for everybody. And so in the report itself, we're going to have an introduction section and talking about the incremental cost and the associated cost effectiveness. And we will be quantifying public health benefits and also discuss other non-quantified benefits for our society. We will be projecting macroeconomic impacts, and most importantly, the associated job impacts. We'll also look at the variations between different regions within our South Coast jurisdiction. And for the next chapter, we will be doing an environmental justice analysis, and we'll conclude and talk about some of the future enhancements that we can make. And I'm going to talk about all these different components in more details in the ensuing slides. And in addition to the main report, we'll also be providing technical appendices for anybody who would like to take a deeper dive into our analysis. And at the end, after we receive the public comments, we will provide responses to each of the public comments. Next slide, please. Sorry, our IM folks, can you move the slides down a little bit so I can see the whole slides in English? Thank you. So what will we be quantifying for the socioeconomic report? And so we'll be quantifying the associated costs and also public health benefits, specifically for those AQMP control measures with quantified emission reductions that are ready to be committed into our state implementation plan. And so in other words, for those measures with to be defined or not yet quantified emission reductions, then we might not be able to fully quantify the cost because we do not really know, for example, how many units of certain emission source categories or the replacement of that would be deployed. And so we will be discussing the preliminary costs to the extent possible. We'll also be looking at infrastructure costs that are results of the expected transition to near zero and also zero emissions. And we will be trying to quantify this cost to the extent possible. So this is a pretty complicated topic, and we're currently actually working with a consultant for them to give us some advice about how to best quantify it going forward. And I do want to caution that even though we are committed to quantifying all the costs for all the measures that have quantified emission reductions, and so in this time around for 2022 AQMP, we do expect that we are going to have a couple of measures that might have not yet defined or not yet well identified technology deployment for those measures. And we'll try our best to look for cost information for those not so well-defined control measures or the so-called black box measures. And so there might be a possibility that we might not be able to fully quantify the costs associated with those measures. And again, we'll be looking at the associated regional job and other macroeconomic impacts, especially those impacts that are associated with our quantified costs and also public health benefits. And specifically for those control measures directly affecting our residents and also the economic sectors located within our South Coast AQMD jurisdiction. And so we're also expecting that there are certain control measures, they might be directly impacting those entities that might not be located exactly within our region, but the impacts on them might have indirect impacts or secondary impacts for our regional economy. So we will try to quantify the impacts to the extent possible. Next slide, please. For the cost of the AQMP, 2022 AQMP, we will be estimating the costs by the control measure. And specifically for the measures with committed emission reductions, we were also looking at that by the affected industry, including small businesses. And because the control measures, they are expected to be implemented along different periods of time. So some are more front-loaded and some might occur towards the end of the analysis horizon, specifically year 2037. So we will also be presenting the costs incurred over time. And at the end, we will be talking about or estimating the cost effectiveness for each control measure using two different methods, namely discounted cash flow method and levelized cash flow method. Next slide, please. And so for these two different cost effectiveness methods, so they are basically trying to evaluate the same thing by using two different measures or two different methods to look at this same project, right? And so if we can help you better understand the differences, I think the best analogy is probably through this like home buying lens. And so for discounted cash flow method or DCF, so imagine that you are buying a house today. And so you are trying to come up with the cost, or you see the listed price of the home that you would like to buy. And then, so with the DCF method, in addition to the home price, you are also looking at, you need to put money aside in a fixed interest rate account in order to pay for the expected expenses that are going to occur in the future. So for example, that would be including utilities, maintenance, etc., for the number of years you would like to reside in this house. And for the levelized cash flow method, or LCF, so the concept is really analogous to that you are trying to buy a house today, but then you are putting down no down payment, and instead you are trying to pay off the whole cost through the fixed rate mortgage. And so you will be paying for this like annual installments of the mortgage payments. And plus every year you have to pay for utilities, maintenance, etc. And then, so this is really the difference. And if I can explain a little bit in a different way, it's also that when you are looking at temperature, like through two different measures, right? Like 0 degrees Celsius and 32 degrees Fahrenheit, you wouldn't say that 32 is hotter than 0 because they're basically trying to measure the same thing. And so it's the same idea here. So hopefully this is helpful. And next slide, please. Yep. And in terms of the public health benefits, so we will be starting with the modeled changes in PM2.5 and also ozone concentrations in the air. And associated with this changes in the concentrations, we will also be expecting changes in health risk experienced by our regional residents as well. And so through that, we will be also to be able to estimate any changes in health incidence. So for example, any changes in the mortality risk, we will be able to convert that into changes in the number of premature deaths. And any changes in morbidity risk for different health outcomes, then we can convert that into changes in, for example, hospital admissions, ER visits, or any missing work or school days. And using standardized economic methods, we will be also monetizing all these public health benefits into dollar amounts. And we'll be doing a whole bunch of different sensitivity tests for our key inputs and assumptions. And in the end, we will be providing also a qualitative discussion of additional benefits that we're not quantifying. So those will be including the visibility benefits associated with cleaner air, that you can see better, see further, you will have a better view. And also reduce degradation to any materials. So for example, building materials or other materials. And we can also expect that there could be increased crop production associated with cleaner air. And so for all this, we will be providing a discussion. Next slide, please. And for our regional economy, we will be quantifying or projecting any job impacts due to incremental costs and also due to quantify public health benefits. And then we're going to combine this together to present you the net job impacts and also how it distributes by different industry sectors and also by occupational earnings group to see if there's a difference between higher earning group or like relatively lower earning group. And we will be also analyzing different competitiveness impacts by different industry sectors. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Previous slide, sorry. All right. So for all those incremental costs, public health benefits, projected net job impacts that I just discussed, we're going to also provide any potential variations that we expect by different sub-county regions, just to see like the differentiations there. In addition, we will be conducting an environmental justice analysis. And so the first step of the analysis is to do EJ screening. So we will be relying on the Senate Bill 535 definition in order to identify these disadvantaged communities. And so the purpose of the definition is mainly for grant allocation to prioritize disadvantaged communities. And in addition to that, we will also be doing some sensitivity tests to look at alternative EJ definitions that are more air quality focused. And the next step is that we will be looking at the EJ impacts of our 2022 AQMP implementation. We will be comparing the health benefits that are projected for the EJ communities versus non-EJ communities. And as many of you might know that, so for income inequality, so the economists have developed different indices in order to evaluate any changes in income inequality. So we will be adapting those income inequality indices in order to also for us to assess changes in the health risk inequalities between the different EJ groups and also between EJ and non-EJ communities. Next slide, please. Yep. And so these are the staff in our socioeconomic group. And if you have any questions or if you would like to make any comments, provide any suggestions, please feel free to reach out Ryan Princess or Brian Vlasic or myself, Elaine Shen, and we will be happy to provide you with any responses or take your inputs, and look forward to talking with you all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Elaine, for that presentation. At this time, if folks have questions on what Elaine presented, please raise your hands. I see Harvey has his hand raised. Can we please unmute Harvey? Okay, go ahead, Harvey.
Hello, am I being heard?
You are.
Okay. Good evening again. I'm Harvey Etter. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition and like-minded folks and entities. The black box was in the 16 plan and before. Dr. Burke was real upset with being called a black box, and I was going to be changed. It makes me think of Pandora's box. Solar was in there, all right? It's a box.
Harvey, this does not sound like it has anything to do with Elaine's presentation.
Well, it does. You're talking about the black box, and black box is solar, and what you call it, and this and that. It's important, okay?
Elaine was talking about the process that we use for our socioeconomic analysis associated with the AQM.
Okay, socioeconomic analysis. Economics for the first 150 years was called political economics. And there needs to be a political economic study done with this. Okay, this is light socioeconomics. And control issues, equity. You're talking environmental justice in these studies you're going to do between wealthier groups and EJ groups and between EJ groups. Okay, The traditional approach has been saying environmental justice is not to have more pollution in poor in communities, that it should be no more than the rich and this and that. Okay, we did a study 40 years ago for the PUC and the low-income solar equity program and the first findings in solar transition. And it was never evaluated by CARB or this group or any but the state or EPA. And the equity we talked about was
Harvey, do you have this? Is about this time is to have
vertically
questions.
and horizontally integrated, owning
We're
the
waiting.
companies,
It's not
control of the
general public
companies,
comment,
equity ownership as Bloomberg, CNBC, etc. Worker co-op.
Harvey, do you have a question?
Yeah. How come this is not in the study now? And are you going to put it in there? And it's extremely important to control issues and ownership and decision making. Investor-owned utilities, which got to be phased out. You got all this problems going twice. PG&E gone bankrupt. Okay.
So, Harvey, do you have a specific
Clean
question
Power
about
Alliance,
the
the third largest
methodology we're
utility
using?
here in LA County and Ventura County, 37 cities. All right. These
Okay,
are
Harvey, it
models
sounds
that are
like
now,
you're
and
veering
I
more
want to
into
see that
public
all these
comment,
models
so
in
we're
this
going
study
to
as
ask you to
well.
wrap up.
It is socio and politically economic, and I have no mention.
Okay. Thanks, Harvey. We are going to run, see if there's anybody else who has any questions regarding our socioeconomic analysis. All right, seeing none, now we've finished everything up. There'll be an opportunity for general public comment. So if folks have general public comment, please raise their hands. Okay, not seeing any hands. So at this point, we will conclude our meeting. Thank you very much for attending today. If you have any other questions, feel free to follow up with staff. We're happy to answer anything that comes up. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks.